When it comes to having your dreams fulfilled or living the life that you dream of, most of the teachings of most of the coaches and teachers out there are about these techniques to manifest your desires, right? You might say that the core teaching behind all of these is this idea that if you imagine the future, the life, this thing that you want, as if it was already true, then in some magical way it will come to you, right? The law of attraction, right? In this episode, I want to get into the reasons why and how and when this works, and also why and how and when this doesn't work. Welcome to the Trance Movement Podcast, where we will be exploring altered states of consciousness through somatic healing practices, embodied spirituality, and what all of that means for your personal path and life. Many of you have probably felt it, right? This magical aspect of life, coincidences, the serendipities of life unfolding. And many of you out there have probably tried out many of these techniques, like, for example, using a vision board is a very popular one. Now, no matter what particular technique you've been hearing about, reading about, trying out, many of us have also experienced the frustration once you start working with these techniques that are being offered, that it doesn't seem to simply work like that, or it doesn't produce the outcome that you desire, right? In the previous episode, we've touched base a little bit around these core beliefs, all the bullshit that's going around, and to offer you, you could say, a third option, a third path, a perspective on reality. It's called Do You Create Your Own Reality? So go check that out if you haven't. Before we dive a little deeper into the techniques, because of course we all eventually want to know how, right? Now, what I think is missing in most of these teachings, and what is probably the reason why it is so frustrating or disappointing for so many people, is an essential first step to take in the process of manifestation. And you might even say, if you take this step properly, then that's maybe even the only thing to do, is to clear up desire itself. So before you start asking how to manifest, before any techniques, before visualization, before vision boards, you might ask, where does this desire actually come from? Because, not all desires are necessarily wise. Not even all desires are free. You might say not all desires necessarily belong to your deeper self, are truly aligned with who you really are. Have you ever thought about that? What the core sources are of your desires? And where things might go wrong when you are not clear about that? First of all, there's definitely, in many of us, trauma-driven desire. I want this because I don't want to feel this or that again, right? Trauma doesn't just shape our fears, it quietly writes our dreams. For example, if you want money because once the not having of it was unbearable, or the wanting of recognition because, once invisibility really hurt you, Or maybe you want control in some way because surrender once was not safe for you. And these kind of desires, they can feel really powerful, right? They are often very charged. They feel really urgent and non-negotiable. And then all of us walk through life with many of these conditioned, culturally shaped desires, right? We all grew up somewhere in a culture, but also in a particular family. And this has also tremendously shaped our desires. And in that sense, it seems to me often like we all seem to want the same things, right? When it comes to careers and choices. But the question is, are these desires truly yours? Or are you just repeating something of a tradition or existing structure? For example, the choice of the right career, the visible role or the admired position. In spiritual circles, this often manifests as the typical spiritual teacher archetype, the influencer version of enlightenment, you might say. If enough people want the same thing, it starts to feel like destiny. And don't get me wrong, these desires, they are not necessarily wrong, but it's good to be aware that often they're just borrowed, and they will pull you into comparison rather than alignment. When desire is inherited rather than discovered, then manifestation becomes just imitation. And this brings me to another core source of desire, and it also bridges to the previous episode, the ego-driven or ego-identified desire. I want to be the one that makes it happen. I'm not just wanting to have some outcome, but I want to have the feeling of authorship. I want credit or identity connected to that. Some kind of proof of being special, or maybe a confirmation of being on the right path. But this kind of ego-driven desire is mostly just a performance, right? A measurement of your worth. You might say a spiritual scoreboard. Sometimes we seem to not really want what we think we want, but we want what it says about us when we get it. Can you feel the difference? So these are some of the, I would say, most important reasons why starting simply with visualization often doesn't work, or, sometimes even backfires. The popular narrative, the popular teachings just simply usually say, just focus on it, really see it and feel it, really believe it, like it's already done, right? But I want to reframe this because visualization itself will just simply amplify what is already there, all the shadow included. It doesn't purify desire. It doesn't question its origin. It doesn't resolve any nervous system state that's underneath it. You can probably imagine that a calm, regulated, aligned nervous system will visualize very differently than a contracted one. And visualization itself, without self-inquiry, you could say is maybe like cranking up the volume on a distorted signal. And there's a lot of research on trauma and how the nervous system organizes itself, things like attachment and how all of that works. And it shows how, our biology is excellent at survival, but it sometimes needs a little help when it comes to truth or perspective. And so, what it comes down to is that often our desires are distorted or borrowed or protective. And so the real question is not maybe, how do I manifest better, but how do I listen more honestly? And this draws back again on the previous episode about a life of purpose and transcendence, and making that shift from asking the big life's question of what do I want from life towards what does life want from me? And if that question already triggers you in some way, then, there you have it, something to work on. Because I'm not saying that you don't matter, but I'm just simply saying that you are part of something bigger. You're not the sole author of the things that are unfolding. And before we can move on towards, techniques of manifestation, it's good to be aware of the fact that, your trauma will ask the question, how do I protect myself? While life will ask the question, how do I move through you? The shadow will hijack the whole process. And so it's good to be aware of that and working first and foremost on clearing up who you truly are. I know that it's very annoying sometimes that we keep talking about trauma, but we all have them, right? And we can all imagine that your trauma, it will narrow your perception. It will narrow your options, and it will disguise itself like destiny. People often just simply say, this is just who I am, or this is just what I want. But those are often just things that have kept them safe, or that have earned them love, or that have helped them to avoid pain. If your nervous system is still bracing, your dreams will usually be about relief, not about expansion. And so, there's nothing wrong with imagining the life that you want, but you start running into problems when visualization runs ahead of integration. So what I'm proposing here and what I'm offering is not just only a necessary first step to take, but in my experience even maybe the only one to take to allow life to unfold in very serendipitous and magical ways for you, is to first stabilize the nervous system, right? To soften your egoic control and to release some of those frozen responses, and to return to your real openness and sensitivity, and to let, or to allow, you could say, desire to emerge, not to be forced, and then to articulate, imagine, or shape your direction. And actually, this is not a way to manifest, but it's more, in reality, a way to remove the interference. I chose to work a lot with techniques that involve things like blindfolds and breath and movement and things like sound and rhythm and music. Not necessarily because these techniques and these journeys and sessions necessarily give you the answers, but because they remove the noise so that the answers can really be heard. When your body finally gets into finishing what it once couldn't, something inside can relax, and then desire becomes less urgent, but at the same time more aligned, more true. This is the shift that I often mention to the people I work with, the shift from wanting to willing. When you truly clear up and shine some light into the shadow, then you come from a state of deep presence, and then something more original can finally speak. And so these practices that I teach, they will remove or dissolve or transform these more compulsive desires, and they will start to reveal the emergent desires. And so, how does that feel? Well, authentic desire doesn't feel urgent. It feels actually strangely obvious. It doesn't shout, it doesn't negotiate, it doesn't need to convince you. When your desire comes from real presence, it feels less like a wanting or a needing, but more maybe like a remembering. This kind of emergence or these kind of revelations, they often happen during trance states, during altered states. Not because there's anything magical happening, but because, an altered state will, at least temporarily, suspend things like social comparison, future projections, and identity maintenance, and the scanning of threats. And so when your body is truly allowed to move and to breathe and to also complete its own rhythms, something inside you reorganizes. And with that reorganization, a new orientation, a new perspective returns that is more aligned with who you truly are and with the life that you're living. So now let's bring this back into perspective, step by step, and also back to the topic at hand. How do you manifest your dreams? So the first step would be to, become aware of all of the noise. And then as a second step, you need to work on releasing some of the tension where all of that noise comes from. Only then will you return to some state of equilibrium or silence. And from that state, something genuine, something authentic can start to move. Something can start to emerge. And only then, as a next step, you start to visualize, you start to shape, you start to plan. But most people and most teachings start with this last step. And then they, wonder why nothing seems to really move. In deep presence, desires don't need to be imagined. They simply arrive. Which brings me again to the topic of purpose, something that I keep coming back to again and again. And when it comes to purpose, in many spiritual teachings, they turn purpose into things like destiny, cosmic assignment, and special mission. But a purpose doesn't have to be necessarily really grand. It just has to be real. Life doesn't ask you to be exceptional. It just asks you to be truly engaged. But it's an important topic, purpose, because we know from psychology that, as a person, you need a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. But your purpose is an emergent property. It's not about who you are, but it's how you relate to life. Again, it doesn't feel chosen, it feels obvious. Trauma often creates a false sense of purpose, like providing worth. And the emergence, or the revelation, as I've been calling it, can start to appear when these traumas can quiet down and when your desires can truly clarify, so much so that it becomes kind of a sense of direction. Because purpose is not something that you can find, it's actually something that finds you when you, stop interfering. For a long time, we thought that healing from trauma meant thinking about it and talking about it with others or with a therapist. But now we know that healing truly happens when the nervous system is given the conditions to complete what once was interrupted. Because, like I've mentioned earlier, you don't really heal trauma by understanding it better. You heal it by letting the body do what it couldn't do back then when you were traumatized. And practices that work with movement and rhythm and breath and altered states, they don't force any change, they create these conditions. Movement, for example, will definitely help to get things moving that were stuck, things that were frozen to be able to be expressed. And sound and music, and especially rhythm, will infuse and also carry this process beautifully by connecting to the bodily rhythms with all kinds of forms of coherence and entrainment, and helping the body to enter a deeper state of presence, a deeper state of trance. When you combine these techniques with things like using blindfolds, which helps to turn inward and which helps to, you could say, enter the subconscious. Another topic, darkness and blindfolds and the subconscious, that we have discussed in a previous podcast. And at the same time, work with conscious breathing or breathwork techniques, as we have also explored in a previous podcast. You create the perfect circumstance to facilitate healing and growth. And then you can actually just allow nature and your life to take its course. And I can tell you, that is when the magic will start to happen. It's when you have, allowed your body to truly finish what your mind might have been trying to manage. But when you allow your body to truly speak, then at some point the past will loosen its grip on the future. Now, to be really, really clear, I'm not trying to offer you any quick fixes here. This is not another strategy to, get what you desire. But what I am offering, and I think this is of real value, is a way to help clear up, because alignment precedes intention. Clarity comes before creation, and when the system is clean, then life will know what to do. Your innate or true desires, some might call it your blueprint or your purpose, they are already there. You don't need to go search for them or work on them. And alignment doesn't require any active desire work anyways. It requires clarity. And clarity is a byproduct of shadow work and healing. And if you're interested in any of these techniques, for example, that I've mentioned, you can check out our website, different other episodes of the podcast, and of course the programs that we offer, different courses and retreats. And of course, for those who are interested in integrating these practices in their own practice as a coach or therapist or a workshop facilitator, you are welcome to join our facilitator training programs. In my experience, once you clean up the system, life will start to unfold in surprisingly precise ways without you trying to make it happen. Your timing will improve, synchronicities will feel really natural, choices will become really obvious. And I'm not saying that I'm offering any guarantees of outcome or any tricks. This is not another form of spiritual bypassing. I'm just saying that this is how life tends to be, to behave, to unfold, once you just simply stop interfering. And so this is the best that I have to offer in this field of manifestation, is to offer techniques, really powerful and really true and time-tested techniques, to clear up and to get your life moving, aligned and with purpose and with direction and intent. And speaking about intentions, have you ever noticed that your intentions are changing? That's because you are changing. Your desire is not your destination. It's a moving interface between you and life. Intentions are not promises for the future, they're orientations in the present. As long as you can keep your intentions alive and flexible and relational, you stay healthy. And just know that every fulfilled desire will change you. And therefore your context will change, and from there the next desire will simply emerge. And if the signal is clear and clean, I promise you, life will respond.